Hello! So, I can only assume that if you're watching this video, you are one of two things. Someone who's just maybe curious about my process whenever I'm coloring a page of Wrong About the Stars, or you are someone who is looking to apply for the internship. In either case, hello! I'm Lissy Dixon, and today I'm going to be showing you the process for coloring a panel of my comic Wrong About the Stars. What I'm using here is an iPad Pro, and the specifics on the model don't really matter. It's more or less just any model of iPad, as far as I'm aware, would be able to use this. The page specs are 3,300 pixels wide and 4,300 pixels tall, so it's about 11 by 14 inches-ish. 300 DPI. That is very important. The page always needs to be at least 300 DPI if you're going to be printing it, which I will be at some point. Now, since we have that all out of the way, I'm going to be using an Apple Pencil to color it. And I have a very specific layer setup that I use. I scanned my page in and edited all of the line art and everything so it's nice and clean. And the line art is on an isolated layer, and it's complete transparency and everything in the background, so if I need to adjust the line art or anything, that's super easy. However, since this is just a coloring demo, we won't be touching that layer at all. All my line art and everything is very clean and ready to roll. After I have the lines all done, I separate off the background base, which is just the area that the panels are, and excluding the gutter, so that whenever I go to color the backgrounds, it's just going to grab the background, nothing outside of the panel. And I have created a layer mask, so that if I take a brush, and say I scribble like that, and I'm going off the side of the panel, it will only color in the panels themselves. I also set up something similar for my character colors, and see, I have it as a white layer so that you can color the background everywhere behind the characters, but you will still have a very clean base for the characters to start. And I have a layer mask for that as well. Let me show you using a different color. If I color, doesn't go off the characters, and I'm just scribbling all over the place. So, now that I've shown you how that all works, let me clear those. And I think for this particular demo, I will just completely color one panel. Probably this one at the top here, because it's going to take me about 45 minutes or longer to color the entire page, despite it being a fairly simplistic page. Sometimes the pages take longer, sometimes they take a little bit less, but generally 45 minutes to an hour and a half is the average time I spend coloring a page of Wrong About the Stars. I will also note that my layers are all normal mode. There are some times where I will make an additional layer on top that's an add layer or something like that to add some extra color or special effects. But for this particular scene and the majority of scenes, I only use normal mode. I have a very specific set of brushes, and I don't have the links to all of these handy, but this set was made by Paolo Dimensioni, I believe it's pronounced. I'm not sure. And that includes Wet 1, which is a modified large version that I made, Wet Thin, and Wet Thin 1, which is another modified version that I made. I also use the default gouache brush that comes with Procreate, which is the program I'm working in. I believe I forgot to mention that earlier. I also, on occasion, will use this Copic brush, which I do believe I have the link to, but the creator did not save their information on the brush, so I can't show you right here, but I will put all of that information down in the description. Apologies for how blown out this is, but I'm trying to make sure that the art in the screen is very clear. And these from Wet, Wet 1, Wet Thin 1, and Gouache and Copic brush, those are what I usually use for coloring. On occasion, I will also dip in and grab just a soft airbrush or something if I need it, but that's more or less just what I use. And most of the time, I can get away with exclusively using this wet brush right here for all my colors. I also have a modified pencil and a ink brush that I use for if I need to touch up my scan lines or if I decide to ink my page digitally. But these we won't use just yet. These I use for finishing embellishments, and I will show you those when we get to that part. For now, I'm going to just grab the wet brush and start with the background. So I will come over here to my palette, which is a very bright little palette. Very saturated, and there's a very good reason why I do that. This pink is just uber saturated, right? Well, this brush, since it's sort of a watercolor brush, is a fairly low opacity, which means if I want it to be really dark for some of the colors, I have to layer it multiple times. That also means that when I'm coloring a large area of color, such as this background, I have to just continuously move the brush, and I cannot lift the brush or anything like that, which can be a bit of a pain for particularly large areas, but I feel like it just gives it a nice, soft, clean, even finish. I originally colored the comic for the first good chunk of the pages completely traditionally using Copic markers, so that influenced a lot of the technique that I use now. And that actually does allow for a little bit of texture to follow through, and just, it looks totally normal because it looks like markers. I don't know how well you can see, but I am going over the same areas a bit to darken them up and just add in some shading, because one of the things about this coloring style that I use and why it's requiring a whole demo is that I don't really use additional layers to add shading or anything unless I'm adding just like one solid layer of shadows. So I almost forgot. I have to color under this shelf a little bit too. But as you can see, all of the shadows and anything like that, it all is going down all in the same layer. And most of the time I will completely color the whole comic page just using like 1 or 2 layers, more or less, aside from a couple of little finishing touches. You may also notice that the comic is overwhelmingly pink, and that is just the way I like it. Part of the coloring style is that it is fairly haphazard and not super tidy, but I do sort of try to keep things in the lines, you know? And don't be afraid of the undo button or the eraser. When I'm erasing things such as color, I usually just use the inking brush that I modified from the default Mercury brush, and it gives me a textured but fairly clean line. But I haven't really needed it, which is why I had to step aside to show you that. These oven doors are a great spot to show you how I do my black fills. areas of black in the colors are actually a very dark, desaturated blue. But since the palette is generally pretty warm, it really helps it give a dark look. And you'll notice that I have to go over the same area multiple times because of how low the opacity is on this brush. But again, that is just something that really helps with the style and is part of the style. Using this same brush, now that the oven doors are just about done, I will show you using just a very light hand that I can also use this very same, very dark gray as the light gray. You can also layer up the colors using that brush, and it works great. I will actually need to use the eraser right here because I colored over the sink basin and the faucet itself. I'm not being too precious about getting everything within the lines that it should be constrained to in a more precious art style. I'm gonna go over this area again just to make sure it's a bit darker and comes towards the viewer a little bit. I will grab this dark orange and go along this little edge. Now make my brush bigger and just very softly do this. And the lighter you touch with this brush, the more you can feather out your strokes. And I use that quite a bit when working with darker colors because you really want it to blend well in some situations. I will show that a bit more when I start coloring the characters in just a second. But see, we've already gotten all the background done here. And now we can move on to the characters. I will use the same wet brush since, like I said, that's really the main brush that I use for everything. And I like to start from darkest to lightest. I'm going to start with Bowie and Alf's hair and Arizona's skin tone. So, again, using the brush wet, I'm going to shrink down just a little bit, and I'm going to just jump into it. And to add some shine to the hair, I'm actually not going to fill the whole area evenly. I'm going to stop right there and follow the curvature of the hair to give it sort of a shine. And this is part of why I like to use a slightly smaller brush when I'm doing things like hair, because hair tends to have a lot of funny little points and nooks that you just gotta squeeze into. And since you kind of want the base layer to be really soft, solid, even, whatever, it just works better to have a smaller brush so you can do it all in one continuous stroke. And once you have your even base layer, you can go back in and start darkening. And we are going to darken this a lot. So we're just going to go over the same area, just usually like 3 to 6 times. That's sort of the sweet spot to get it to the right color. And I actually do push a bit hard when I'm darkening like this, but for the base layer I didn't push too terribly hard. To add a little texture, just do some little swipes. And I've tried to actually sort of do this look from the get-go a few times, but I found that doing the even base layer just makes it look better. Just can't quite explain why, it's just a thing. It's also nice to leave a little bit of not super dark area, like on the top here. Gives it some nice dimension in the chunks of hair. And there's Bowie's dark brown hair. We will do the same thing sort of on Elf's hair now. I like to make the white strand sort of wavering in shape. As you can see, I make it taper and widen a lot on Bowie. And sometimes you find yourself just letting all the shapes and everything be dictated by the size of your brush, since you just start the stroke and see where it takes you. And that is totally fine, and I feel like that lends a lot to the sort of loose, fun style for the series. I'm going to tidy up a couple little edges there, and Elf's hair is now done. We now get to move on to Arizona, and I'm going to use that same exact brown. It is this one right here, which is a warm brown, and the one that I usually use for any browns on characters or important objects. However, first, I'm going to grab some of this bright reddish orange. It's really more of an orange reddish. And I will get a small brush and just very lightly blush in on her face and her ears. And this won't show too terribly much under the base coat of the dark brown, but it adds just a little bit of warmth, since this particular brush's blending mode that it was created with actually tends to mute the saturation a bit. So I find that with Arizona, I just have to give it a little bit of help to keep her from looking so faded and usually just kind of ashy. And there's that first base coat, and you can kind of tell that it's making her really more of a grayish brown than a brown. And we want her to have a really warm, pleasant skin tone. So we still go through and we do all the base of all of her skin with that color, and then we go to this really, really red medium brown. And then we will go over the top of all of that, and it will warm it right back up. Now look at that! She looks all nice and rosy again. We'll go back down to that dark brown that we used for the base coat, and shade in a few spots, such as the eye wells underneath where her hair falls, the tips of her ears, since her braids cover that a little bit, and then darken her neck just a smidge, where the sleeves fall on her arms, and darken the underneath since they sort of dip down where we can't see. And that's usually how I do her skin. It depends on the page and the lighting situation though, but yeah, that's the general way that I do it. Next, I will take that same dark reddish brown and just scribble around. Since her hair's detail mostly comes from the inking, you really don't have to do much with Arizona's hair. In fact, it's better the less you do with it, because if you darken her hair too terribly much, it usually just loses all the detail, and you just can't tell the texture super well. So I did more or less just a flat color with a couple of little darker parts where it dips into the shadow a bit more. We'll go to our black tone and now start filling in her uniform. And just like with the oven doors, this is going to take quite a few passes. And since it's a bit more detailed of a shape than the oven doors, it takes a bit longer per pass. I'm not worrying too much about if I mess up or get out of my lines or anything, especially because if I get too far out of line, I can just either erase it or use the smudge tool to tug it back into place. In fact, I think I may accidentally mess up in a brief moment here to show you exactly how I do that, since that's an important technique to know. So, say I have all this base color done for her, and then I want to start adding in some shadows. Add in some shadows. Oh no, I got a bunch of, like, this dark color onto her arms. I'm going to use the smudge brush, or smudge tool, and use the basic gouache brush. And then I'm going to zoom in real far on the area, and I'm just going to lightly nudge it back where it goes. And see, you lose a bit of texture when you do that, but if you're too worried about the texture, you can always grab a similar color and go over the top again, and it'll bring a little bit of the texture back into it. It doesn't always work perfectly, as you can see that her arms are still a bit discolored. You can also go into the sketching set. I have tons of custom brushes, I apologize. And you can grab brushes such as the Bonobo chalk brush or the default Procreate pencil. You can grab white and just real lightly go in there and go over the top. And it emulates that sort of white noise dappling that you get in the paint texture. And that's how I fix any sort of blunders where I get into the wrong area. I'm actually going to see if I can undo to the point where it's before I did that, because that was helpful for demonstrative purposes, but we're just going to try to not do that to begin with. Alright, grab that black again, and work on shading her outfit a little. Now I really try to think about the dimension of the character as I'm doing all this rendering, and especially when I get to coloring the white part of her uniform. I use this same sort of technique whenever I'm coloring a white shirt on Alf or on Sheikah. And you'll see me do both of those. But I go into the areas where there would be shadows from wrinkles, and I'm sort of just trying to paint in the dark areas. With the white shirts, I tend to leave a lot of white area. I follow any of the creases or wrinkles in the outfit. And I feel like it gives it a very nice, authentic look. With these sort of cuffs, I usually just put some shadows in the two sides and leave the middle open. Put a little bit of shadow there since it curls under, and ta-da! You have finished coloring Arizona. Next, I think we'll come over here and we'll work on Sheikah. I usually start with her hair, honestly. So, I will actually bring in a reference. I'll drag my reference up there, shrink the window down, and then zoom in to where I can see her full outfit. Make sure I'm still on my wet brush, and let's get started. I like to do the pink of her hair first, since it really helps to blend, and also Sheikah has huge hair, so it usually starts shaping up really quickly and feels like you've made some really good progress if you start with her hair. Get some nice pink going, and then we grab this sort of minty green blue color, and you will very lightly feather it into the pink and blend it. And sometimes you have to go over the same spot a couple times to really get some saturation laid down. And then I like to cut off there and add it there, and you get a little bit of shine. I know her hair is very pastel, so this is probably a bit tricky to see, but trying my best here with limited tools. I will also impose a finished version of the page as a clean image at the end so that you can really see all the details and everything I'm talking about. I also like to add a little extra shading against her body. Little tail of hair down there at the bottom. And now, since I've done that, I like to move on to the next darkest part of her outfit. In this case, that would be the skirt, since you can't see her shoes in this panel. So I choose that cool blue and do an even base coat, and I leave a light white band right there on the edge. That's a technique that I held over from when I was coloring with Copic markers, and it just looked nice in my opinion. It also saved a little bit of ink and time, so. Little shadow right there, shadow down here, and the skirt is done. Next, I'm going to grab some gray and very lightly shade her legs since she's got some leggings on. And then do her ear fluff, which is just really just one or two quick swipes usually. And then onto her sleeves, where we will do a very similar thing to what we did with Arizona, where we're really just following the shape and the wrinkles. And it's actually kind of preferable to have some hard lines in the white part of a shirt here, because I feel like that looks more authentic to a lightweight, like a silk or something like that. And there you go. Sheikah's shirt is done. Do her ears real quick, which her ears are generally like a completely flat, like robin's egg blue, which is very bright. Let me readjust my exposure here. There we go. I feel like that shows the colors a little bit better. And now I'll show you the very important part of coloring the skin. I use this 4th dark orange. It's actually not that dark, but in comparison to the rest of the skin tones, it feels dark. And using the wet brush still, I zoom in real close, get a tiny brush, and start painting in shadows. This is something, again, held over from when I was doing the coloring with Copic markers, where working from the dark to the light actually worked a little bit better. And I was pleased with how the technique carried over to digital. And then, since we kept that white band on the side of her skirt, we're going to do the same thing on her face. We're going to, a little bit from the edge, sort of feather it out, hard edge towards the white part, feather it out. And sometimes you have to feather it out really far. Do the same thing with her arms, add some shadows, feather it out, feather it out. And you can even sort of feather into the other shadows you've already done. Make sure I get that part nice and dark, since these are spots where the lighting isn't hitting. And then I will grab this peachy light skin tone, get a slightly bigger brush, and I will just go over all the skin area. And it'll lighten some of the spots that I already went over, and it will darken anywhere that's white. And you'll notice me going over her eyes. That's fine. This works very nicely to just erase out the eye, and I will do that in just a second for you. I usually do 1 or 2 passes of that peachy tone, and it fades the bright orange down a little bit and makes it blend very nicely. Now I'll just take an eraser and carve out the eye area. Now I'll grab this bright lavendery color and just really slap it on in there. Sheikah has very purple eyes. And there you go. Now Sheikah is done as well. Move over here to Alf, who, based on our reference from this page over here, he's wearing a white shirt as well. In his situation, we're actually going to start with his pants, since they are the darkest part of his outfit. Bigger brush. Go over it another time. And a little shading. Belt ring. Now some brown for his belt. Second layer of brown. Now go at it right here so that it has some shading where the shirt falls on it. For his middle buckle, I will do the top part, bottom part, darken that edge right there, and leave some white as sort of a shine detail. And from that, I will go straight into coloring his white shirt. His shirt, I admit, in this panel does not show a whole lot of dimension, but we work with what we got. Good enough. Now we will color his skin the same way that we color Sheikah's, since they are both pasty pale little kiddos. And Alf has a pretty big nose, so we'll leave some extra white there where his nose bridge is. Dark neck, dark inside of the ear, and I will actually just very lightly do a base of orange across his whole ear. Since his arm comes forward a bit, make sure we add lots of white to show that. Now grab that light peach tone and go over all the areas, leaving the white untouched. And now he's done. I did a pretty good job about not getting into his eyes, and honestly, I'm just going to leave it as is. I'm not going to clean it up anymore. For Bowie, he's wearing a dark colored jacket, so we will do that first. I'm assuming, since I'm doing his jacket a little haphazardly, that I will really have to come in and clean it up more. Especially since it's a lot of really dark darks by some just pure whites. See if I can expedite that second layer, since that took a little bit with the first one. It is a little bit tricky. It feels like you have to really move fast sometimes but you can go as slow as you want to. You do not have to hurry. The important part is just that you don't lift your pen. Just keep it moving so that Procreate doesn't make an auto shape out of it or anything, and you don't lift your pen. But you can go as fast or slow as you want when you're filling a large area here. Now I will darken up this area down here. These brushes are just fun to use, so huge props to the creator of them. There we go. It shows up very dark on camera. It's hard to fully get this to capture well since I'm taking a video of a screen. Next, we will do his jeans. So I grabbed this slate blue, do a base coat, and then I just do a bunch of swipes, since that emulates the look of denim a bit better. Now, we will grab this pink red for the stripes on his shirt. And I go over them 2 to 3 times, since they are a little bit hard to get the full saturation, just because they're a darker color. And now I will take my eraser and tidy up some of the spots where I got that black tone. And now, since the rest of his outfit is whites, just grab some gray and scribble it on in. Making sure to pay attention to sort of where the light must be coming from. In this particular image, the light is coming from more or less just directly overhead and center. Add some details there. Now, since we've colored his whole outfit, onto his skin. We do it exactly the same way as Sheikah and Alf's. That orange-brown on the edges there. It seems counterintuitive, but you usually put, or at least I usually put, the majority of the darkest orange on the lightest side, since I feel like something about that just seems right. More or less, it just adds more contrast to the actual white part. Then I shade under his soft jaw, and there. Now we grab that peach, and we just have at it. Now I erase out any of the spots where I may have gone a little overboard. I also grab a bit of gray to fill in areas like his earring. And now we have all of the base colors on this panel done. Pardon me adjusting my exposure a little bit. But the next thing that I do is actually something that if you're helping with the internship position, you don't need to do. I will handle this part. This is like the last little icing on top. I will grab my pencil brush and a pink, and I will zoom in, and I will just aggressively scribble. And it actually doesn't really look like I did that much, but when I zoom way in, you can see a lot of the pencil strokes. It adds some nice texture and extra color to the characters' faces, and it gives it one more layer of like a hand-drawn traditional type look. The majority of this workflow, as you've probably caught on, is really just me trying to emulate what I did traditionally. and they all get these cute rosy cheeks. And Arizona actually gets this orangish red. Since her skin tone is darker, the pink just looks out of place. And there we go. Everyone's all blushed up. And now I'll grab my ink and gel brush, grab solid whites. I can close that reference. And now I will go over here and I will add shine. Since it's very pastel, the shine actually is a very minor little addition, but it adds just that last little bit of polish and finish. It also really helps when you have like an area of white on the edge here, because it makes that ink gel just really blend in well. Arizona does not usually get any sort of white addition since she has really dark hair, and with the texture it just looks really out of place to have like white shines. Like if I were to do that on her hair, it doesn't make sense with her texture. It looks cute, but it doesn't make sense. Alf and Bowie already have this white built into their hair, and sometimes I'll add a little bit of extra detail, like I'll add a couple little swipes or something like that. But for the most part, their hair doesn't need a lot of extra shine. I like to go to the rim of Alf's glasses and give a little extra light to it, just right around the very edge. This helps to add a little bit of differentiation sometimes, because you may notice that the inks get a little bit lost in here, and that just helps to clear out his eyes again. And for Bowie, I will add some little white dots on his piercings to remind us that they are shiny little metal and not just moles. And there you have it. That is my process for coloring a panel of Wrong About the Stars. And the process can change in some situations, or depending on just the page's needs, or if there's just something special about the page. But this is my usual workflow for an entire page. And as you saw, it took about 40-45 minutes for me to color just this one panel. But that was mostly because I was stopping to talk and explain what I was doing, and I also work a bit slower on camera, since I can't really get in the zone and listen to music and stuff. But if you would like to try your hand at coloring this page, you can always apply for the internship position, in which you will be given a color palette, a brush set, and an illustration for you to try your hand at coloring. And if we think you're a good fit for the position, meaning me and you as well, you will be provided a page. It may be this one, it may be a different one, and we will go from there and see how it all goes, and if you do a good job. If you would like more details on the internship positions, please read the description and check out some of the links down there. I would super appreciate some help. It is a learning experience and not a job, so it is volunteer, not paid, just as a good disclaimer there. So thank you so much to anyone who watched this whole video. And it was a bit long, but hopefully it was helpful and gave you a better idea of my process and helped you learn how to color pages yourself. If you happen to use this sort of style for anything, let me know. Post it online, tag me. I would love to see it. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Take care and God bless.